never slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness.
One morning in early 2009, a man named Moran Oz, customer relations manager of an Israeli company, came to his senses and found himself struggling in the middle of the sea, being hit by bullets all around him in the water. A minute ago, he had been sitting on the deck of a small pleasure boat a little further from the Philippine coast, enjoying the scenery. But now he was in the middle of the water, and when he looked, the boat was moving away from him, and three men whom he thought were his boss's partners were aiming at the water around him from the boat. After they stopped shooting, one of them said, "Those were for the sharks. Next time, it's for you." The stories of Paul Le Roux's former employees are almost all similar, whether in the Philippines, Israel, Hong Kong, or Zimbabwe. They were all employees of a seemingly reputable, ostensibly legal company where everything was in order. Some of them had never even heard Paul's name. Some who had heard it considered him a brilliant and ingenious person, but also a bit unpleasant, sometimes unpredictable, but nothing too strange. Then, something would happen. A message would arrive, or a rumor would reach their ears, or someone would tell them, for example, "Go to the harbor and meet those three people you haven't seen before." And that's when they would realize they were in a business much more illicit than they could have imagined. Then a big question would arise for them: what to do now? For some, this question was more ethical, but for most, it was a practical question. What should we really do? For some, this moment was a choice between freedom and imprisonment. For others, a choice between life and death. Most of the people who became Paul's associates were fundamentally good people. As one person said, these were good people who knew the difference between right and wrong. They understood, but under the pressure of threats and intimidation, they ultimately fell into a life of crime. Moran Oz is an Israeli, born and raised in Jerusalem. He was a bright kid at school, one of those who didn't attend classes, but showed up for exams at the end and got good grades. All the kids wanted to be friends with him. He was a bright kid at school. In February 2005, he finished school and completed his mandatory year of military service in Israel. He was at a point where he had to decide what to do: go to university or start his own business. He had gone to America to visit his aunt when one of his friends called him, saying, "My brother-in-law wants to start a company in Israel and is looking for someone with good English and computer skills. I thought you fit the description." He said, "Yes, that's great," and returned to Israel and took the job. The person who hired him was named Boaz Tegart. He started this business with his brother, Tamar Tegart. Tamar lived in Los Angeles, but the company, named Beit Aurigin Company, was in Jerusalem. The work they did was very popular in Israel at the time. They became a call center, or rather, provided after-sales services for American companies. This was because Israel had strong technology and IT infrastructure. Many people could speak English, and the workforce was cheaper than, for example, in America. They provided after-sales services. Anyone in America who wanted to call a manufacturer or a company for follow-up would essentially have their calls answered in Israel. It was called a call center, but most of their work was done by email. Their clients were American companies. British companies mostly went to India for this work. Their company handled customer service for a company that had a network of various websites, with names like Elephant RX Limited and many, many other websites. Its job was to sell prescription drugs online to American customers. The way it worked was that a customer would go to one of their sites, fill out a questionnaire, answer a series of questions about their medical history, symptoms, and so on, and order the drug they wanted. Then they would pay with a credit card. This order would go to a doctor in America who was also employed by the same company. That doctor would review the questionnaire and answers, check the patient's file, confirm yes or no, and write a prescription based on their judgment. Then this prescription would electronically go to a pharmacy in America, which was also employed by the company. They also had a database that contained the order history of each customer, and if they saw that someone had recently received a drug and should still have some, they would not fulfill the order. Everyone who worked there, including Oz, was told that this business was completely compliant with U.S. laws and there was nothing illegal about it. Occasionally, however, there would be an intervention in the company. For example, for a while, they would say that a specific drug could not be sent outside a certain state, so they would remove that drug from the system. Or, if a law about a drug changed, the system would be updated according to the new law. Sometimes a pharmacy would say, "We have an inspection this week," and they would go offline for a few days, their connection would be cut, and then they would return to the network. The work Oz did in Jerusalem required no pharmaceutical or technical knowledge. He would go to work every morning, see the approved prescriptions in the system, and send each one to a pharmacy based on their workload. The other employee's job was to answer phones if a doctor or pharmacist had a technical question, or if a customer needed help with their order and had a credit card issue, or things like that. They all had to choose American names for themselves and tell everyone that they were in America, in Utah. Oz's name in this job was Ron Martin. For example, one of the people on the other end of the line was a 74-year-old pharmacist named Charles Schultz, who worked in a small town in rural Wisconsin. USA, he was a soldier in the Korean War and served in the Army's medical corps there. Later, in 1964, he and his wife, Jing, opened a pharmacy. After some time, their business finally picked up after a few years. In the 1980s, he bought another pharmacy in another small town 60 kilometers from their own town. For years, he worked morning and night in the store with a good reputation, hardworking and popular, and had a decent business. In the summer of 2006, Schultz received a fax from a company he had never heard of before, named AlphaNet. It contained a very tempting offer, stating that without needing any additional investment, he could increase his sales. The work was very easy. He just had to enter the company's system, view the thoroughly verified prescriptions written by American doctors, fill the prescriptions, and mail the drugs from the postal address. They provided from the FedEx address they provided to the patient's addresses in America. AlphaNet would reimburse him for the cost of the drugs and postage based on the invoice and at wholesale price, and would pay him $3.50 per prescription. This offer came to Schultz at a very sensitive time. For 10 or 12 years, his business had been declining because large chain pharmacies had opened branches in his town, and he couldn't compete with them. On the other hand, his son had developed a nervous illness that required constant care. He himself had suffered several minor heart attacks, probably due to excessive work stress and frequent travel between these two towns. At first, he ignored the facts for a while. Then he found it very tempting, did some research, and finally called the company. He made some inquiries. "We don't sell controlled substances. The U.S. government classifies drugs into 5 categories based on how addictive and harmful they are, and some are completely prohibited." They told him, "We don't sell totally prohibited drugs, and if anyone suggests you sell these drugs online for us, start putting money aside for lawyer fees and court costs right away, because they will definitely come after you. Our work is clean and legal." These were the words taught to these employees to tell anyone who called. AlphaNet and 10 to 12 similar sites sold a lot of drugs, from hair loss pills to Viagra and various other medications. However, their best-selling drugs were 3, Ultram, Soma, and Fioricet. Ultram is actually a type of tramadol, a painkiller derived from opiates. Soma is a painkiller for muscular pain, usually used for back pain. Fioricet is usually used for migraines. By the summer of 2006, Schultz had registered both of these drugs in the AlphaNet system. And very quickly, his work reached a point where he was filling thousands of prescriptions per month. His account was constantly receiving tens of thousands of dollars from Hong Kong. Most of it was the cost of the drugs. But of course, it was also his own earnings, and it was clear that those at the top were making a lot of money. But Schultz was happy in the end. Later, when he was caught, he said in his defense that they had given him full assurance that the work was absolutely, completely legal, and he, of course, wanted to believe that. Boaz and Tamer, the two brothers who had started this Israeli company, had told their employees that they also had a third partner, a programmer whom Tamer had found through an advertisement on an online forum. That programmer handled part of the company's technical work and outsourced another part to two companies in Romania. However, the day-to-day operations of the company were handled by these two brothers. In July 2006, when Oz returned from his vacation, he was told that Boaz was no longer with them, and from now on, Tamer would run the business alone from America. The company continued its course, growing rapidly. They brought their friends into the company. The working hours were good and flexible. The salaries were also good, about 15% higher than other places in Israel. Everyone was satisfied, everyone was happy. After a year and a half, one day afternoon, a message popped up on Oz's computer screen. It read, "From now on, I am your boss." It was from someone named Paul Le Roux, a name Oz had never heard before. There were no explanations, no introductions, no greetings, nothing. It just said, "I was partners with Tamer from the beginning. Now Tamer is leaving, and from now on, you report to me." Oz called Tamer, who told him, "Yes. Paul is a programmer from South Africa who lives in the Philippines, and he's been our silent partner until now. Now I'm stepping aside and it's all his work." Oz asked, "Why?" Tamer said, "I've worked enough. I want to spend some time with my daughters. They're growing up and all that." The new boss initially didn't change anything in Jerusalem. Everything remained as before. The number of people grew, salaries were high, working hours were good. Oz's responsibilities gradually increased. Paul kept saying he was too busy to come to Israel and did almost all his work through the company as internal chat system. He was always blunt, direct, and to the point, without greetings or jokes. He never asked about people's personal lives or said anything about himself. Information security was extremely important to him. He had told them to encrypt their hard drives with a program called E4M, then later with another program called TrueCrypt. But besides these, as far as Oz was concerned, he said that the boss is the boss, and there was no big difference. After a few months, Paul ordered Oz and another colleague named Berkman to go to Manila to see him. They took a business-class flight to Hong Kong. A driver picked them up in Hong Kong and took them to a very chic apartment near a synagogue in the Philippines. They had several dinners with Paul in a casual cafe, a hard rock cafe, and a fancy commercial shopping center in Manila. He would tease them there, telling the waiter that they were Jews and couldn't eat anything with pork, just bring them chips. He talked about wanting to open a new call center, this time in Tel Aviv, and that they needed to hire people for that too. And not to worry about money, there was money. They returned, and he sent an Englishman named Robert McGowan to Israel to register this new company in Tel Aviv. They registered it, and these companies, not this company, but the one in Jerusalem, none of them had their own income. They would send him a monthly list of their expenses, and he would send them about $36,000 a month from Hong Kong. He hired a very good and well-known accountant to ensure that no money would be lost in their books. Gradually, Paul started opening call centers in other places. Orders were plentiful. The business was running very well. Customers had increased, questions had increased. They were constantly advertising and marketing through email, and on the other hand, they were constantly recruiting people. He opened 2 call centers in the Philippines and 1 in India. In Israel, they were always looking to hire people. Anyone who knew Oz would say that whenever he saw them, he would say, "Do you know anyone looking for a job who speaks English? Tell them to come work for us." Paul Le Roux's trust in Israelis is a bit strange. Among his employees, this man is known for being racist. He calls everyone nigger. Some he calls white nigger, or flappy, which is the equivalent of nigger in South Africa, a very insulting term. He called the Filipinos he lived among for years monkeys. But with Jews, it seems he generally got along well. Then, gradually, he started pushing for Israelis to come to the Philippines. Slowly, one by one, a wave of Israelis began to go to work in the Philippines office. One of them recounts, "I started in the Tel Aviv office. I saw an advertisement, went for an interview, and started working. I quickly became a manager. Then the Manila offer came, and I went to Manila. People were constantly coming and going, and there was a lot of turnover in the companies. He was always looking for new people. In short, I went there, and I knew nothing about the Philippines, nothing about what that company wanted or did in the Philippines. A few days after I arrived there, without even having seen Paul yet, I became the manager of 3 people. In reality, he just wanted someone who could speak English and assign tasks to the Filipinos. Among the Israelis, Paul also provided apartments. He had many apartments in Manila and constantly moved people between them. This young man says, "I was first in one house, then he told me to move out. They moved me to an apartment in the city center, in the commercial area of the city. After a while he again said, 'I want this apartment myself. Move out from here and go somewhere else.' He sent me somewhere else. I didn't understand why this guy had so many empty houses all over the place. He also paid them well in the Philippines, which was much cheaper than Israel. He paid them the same Israeli salary. On the other hand, negotiating with him wasn't very difficult, especially if you weren't intimidated by his presence. They say he started very low in negotiations. This young man himself said, 'I negotiated with him in such a way that he started very low, but I knew that money really had no value to him. These numbers meant nothing to him. So I said, why shouldn't I ask for a lot of money? And every time I wanted something, I got it.' Another person recounts, 'I worked for him for 2 years. I only saw him 2 or 3 times. Once he called and said, 'Come, I want to see the apartment.' I went there, a very large empty space. That fat Paul was sitting behind a table, the only furniture there in that large space. Behind him, a row of servers was also set up, like in a command room, a control center, as if you were important. Then he said, 'How are things?' I said, 'Good.' Then I started reporting with numbers. For example, this much data is this much data is that. He cut me off and said, 'Okay, now if you need anything, just tell me.' The meeting with the boss, whom I had never seen before and who had pulled me from Israel and brought me to the Philippines, giving me 100 people to manage, didn't even last 5 minutes. I said, 'Is this all you wanted to say?' He said, 'Yes, I just wanted to see.' But let's hear from Oz. After that boat incident, Oz was never the same person. He didn't tell anyone about that story, but his friends say that after he returned from that trip, he became quiet, very withdrawn. Sometimes he would say, 'I shouldn't be working for this man.' One of his friends says, 'I pushed him several times to come work with me in a startup. I told him the startup ecosystem here would be better for him and all that, but he always said, 'I can't. In Oz's opinion, after that trip, Paul had also changed. He spoke very threateningly. Once he turned to one of the personnel and said, "When I call, answer the phone. Next time, if you don't pick up the phone, ... He had his hands in strange businesses. Someone says, "I heard he smuggles weapons." Someone says, "I heard he ordered someone killed." Someone says, "I heard he owns a company that makes airplanes and they use them to smuggle drugs from one country to another." These were very strange stories that no one could believe or confirm, but they spread by word of mouth. One of the few people who separated from Paul, many of the people who talk about him worked with him until the very end. One of the few people who separated from him says, "There is a difference between someone who does some illegal things in business and someone who only pursues illegal work." I once suggested to Paul, "Let's focus on these call centers, expand them, then sell them." But he was uninterested. He only wanted to commit bigger and bigger crimes, it seemed. In 2011, Paul disappeared several times for short periods, then reappeared. No one knew where he was during those times, but each time he returned, his behavior became more threatening than before. When he started going underground, it was no longer possible to talk to him. The questions he asked were meaningless, and whatever you said, he would get confused. So as the saying goes, whatever he said, I said, yes, sir, and then I went and did my own work, hoping he would forget. Then, in that same year, 2011, the U.S. government prohibited the interstate shipment of the drug Soma, and thus a third of the company's income disappeared overnight. U.S. government records show that from 2007 to 2011, this company sold a total of $300 million in drugs. That was the size of his business. After the income decreased, the company ran into problems. Paul decided to close the Tel Aviv office and transfer everyone to the Philippines. He did that. After a while, he realized he had to do the same with the Jerusalem office. He also pulled them to the Philippines, firing people. In fact, he gave the work to Filipinos. Then, gradually, the money that used to come from Paul S. account in Hong Kong started coming from new and strange places. Then, it started coming intermittently. At one point, they didn't even have enough money to pay the employees they had fired in Israel. Oz, who pursued it vigorously, sent 2/3 of the money and, in a very strange and very rare message, apologized for the money and said, "I promise the rest will be paid soon." The next thing he did was give all his managerial duties to a Filipino named Master Persian Cat, a person whom Oz, his partner, and the call center managers had never seen before. But now the order was that all work had to be done with this Master Persian Cat. This was also a very strange move because until then, no one had seen Paul trust any Filipino with any managerial work. Oz, on the other hand, was frustrated, waiting for the money to come so he could pay the employees. Therefore, he contacted both Paul and Master Persian Cat daily. The nefarious activities were progressing like this. In March 2012, D agents came to Schultz's pharmacy with a search warrant. Schultz, without question, confirmed his cooperation with the company. He handed over all documents, accounts, ledgers, and everything else to them. He also agreed to maintain his relationship with the company and let them record his conversations and do whatever they wanted. He even gave them a room, telling them, "Come and set up in the pharmacy and follow the matter closely." However, this pharmacist, who is now almost 80 years old and the largest supplier for RX Limited, practically had little information about the company as a whole. All he knew were a few names, a few emails, a few phone numbers, a few account numbers, and that was it. Then, in late 2012, Paul disappeared again. His disappearance this time was serious. Rumors were rampant, but everyone, including these Israelis in the story, completely lost contact with him. Master Persian Cat also said, "I have no news of anything." Payments completely stopped. No more money was coming. The managers knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. They prayed he was dead. What you heard was the second episode of the 12th part of Channel NARRA podcast titled Mastermind. I, Ali Bandari, produced Channel NARRA podcast with the help of Namlik. One episode of the serialized Mastermind podcast is uploaded simultaneously every week on Namlik, me and SoundCloud. Introduce Channel NARRA to anyone you think likes to hear new and true stories. Follow Channel NARRA Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Telegram with the ID at Channel Podcast to be informed about new episodes and to receive interesting peripheral and supplementary materials about the Mastermind story and stories that have been told before on the podcast. Channel NARRA Podcast, Mastermind, and the stories that ...